When it comes to the Vietnam War, we are all too familiar with the images of devastating bombs, fierce battles, long political controversies, and immeasurable losses. But among countless stories about battlefields and politics, there are events that will forever be haunting and painful memories in Vietnam's history. The My Lai Massacre of 1968 was one of those haunting tragedies. More than 500 innocent civilians, mostly the elderly, women, and children, were brutally killed by American soldiers. When the truth was exposed in 1969, not only the United States but the entire world was shaken. Yet justice was never truly served, and the trial that should have taken place never came. By late 1969, the already overwhelmed White House fell into even deeper turmoil after a report by a young journalist, Seymour Hersh, was published across dozens of American newspapers. The massacre of civilians by U.S. soldiers in My Lai, Quang Ngai, Vietnam, had begun to surface, and it shocked the entire nation. "What are we supposed to do now?" Nixon asked in bewilderment. He already had more than enough problems at home, and the emergence of yet another scandal from the Vietnam War was the last thing he wanted to deal with. Senior U.S. government officials and top White House advisors held tense discussions, searching for a way to explain the newly uncovered incident to the American public. On November 21st, during a meeting of the National Security Council, advisor Henry Kissinger stressed that the White House needed to develop a coordinated response plan to establish a controlled media strategy and to maintain a unified line in every statement given to the press and the public. Nearly 10 days later, on December 1st, the White House created a special white-collar task force whose mission was to discredit witnesses. According to notes from White House Chief of Staff Bob Haldeman, this included using whatever tactics were possible and ensuring that any officials involved would not make careless or revealing comments to the media. But even the best communication experts in the world were powerless in an environment of strong press freedom and open information like the United States. The story quickly spiraled into one of the most overwhelming media storms any American president had ever been forced to confront. Everything began on March 16, 1968. Charlie Company, also known as Company C, received orders to carry out a search and destroy mission, a familiar operation during the Vietnam War. Their target was a village in My Lai, in the northern part of Quang Ngai province, a place marked on U.S. military tactical maps as Pinkville. It was an area American soldiers of the time grimly referred to as India Country, implying that it was under the near-complete control of Viet Cong forces and local communities sympathetic to the revolution. Charlie Company was a line company within its battalion, formed only a short time earlier under the U.S. Army structure, in mid-1967. The soldiers were informed that they would soon be deployed to Vietnam. Shortly after, they underwent a brief training program that lasted only through November 1967. During this single month of preparation, beyond basic combat skills, the troops were instructed on the proper treatment of prisoners of war, the provisions of the 4 Geneva Conventions on International Humanitarian Law, the definition of civilians, and the U.S. rules of engagement. The commander of the company was William Calley, Jr., commonly known simply as Calley. In his 1976 memoir, General William Westmoreland asserted that Calley would never have become an officer had Congress not repeatedly intervened in the Pentagon's recruitment practices. He criticized the draft deferments granted to college students, arguing that they deprived the U.S. Army of the high-quality manpower it once relied upon and forced recruitment standards to be lowered. Calley embodied the stereotypical image of a suburban Florida youth of the era, standing barely 5'3", not particularly robust, with a face that revealed little emotion and offered nothing distinctive. During his school years, he struggled to pass a few courses at a local community college before drifting from job to job as his money ran out. When he received a notice to report for re-evaluation under the draft, Calley joined with an enthusiasm bordering on impulsiveness. The U.S. Army took him in during March 1967, just 1 year before the My Lai Massacre. He soon entered officer candidate school and graduated ranked 120th out of 156 cadets. Despite his limited qualifications and rushed training, Calley became the commanding officer of Charlie Company, carrying with him a simplistic view of the Vietnam War. Anyone associated with the Viet Cong was the enemy. Calley later recalled that at officer school, many veterans told him that during their time in Vietnam, they often could not distinguish between combatants and civilians. The Viet Cong's irregular style of warfare, eschewing uniforms, ignoring conventional rules of identification, and relying heavily on guerrilla tactics, blurred the lines even further. This, combined with the constant uncertainty of the battlefield, inflicted severe psychological strain on many American soldiers. Calley was one of them. He claimed everyone there was Viet Cong. The old, the women, the teenagers, the children, they were all Viet Cong. Even in a woman's belly, there was Viet Cong. I'd bet there were thousands of Viet Cong children ready to be born. The brutal environment of the Vietnam War did nothing to challenge or soften Calley's worldview. After less than 2 months doing logistics work for other companies, Charlie Company had encountered Viet Cong forces directly only once or twice at most. Yet, they had already suffered casualties from sniper fire, booby traps, mines, and bamboo stakes. Fear, frustration, anger, and hatred built up inside the unit, an escalation easy to understand in such conditions. But My Lai was not one of those situations. The operation unfolded without any resistance. No Viet Cong fighters were found, and Charlie Company recorded no casualties whatsoever. The only wounded soldier was a private who shot himself in the foot to avoid taking part in the massacre, though some records suggest the injury may have been accidental. According to journalist Seymour Hersh, My Lai was the result of a chain of failures, beginning with flawed intelligence that assumed the Viet Cong's 48th Battalion was still operating in Sun Mai, and extending to the distorted belief among many of the soldiers that the villagers of Sun Mai, including those in My Lai, were all communist sympathizers. This mindset was further reinforced by a conviction that the South Vietnamese government would tolerate any military action the United States carried out on its soil. All of these failures converged upon a single unit, a group of soldiers inadequately trained, poorly educated, driven by a thirst for revenge, eager to prove themselves through body counts, and led by a misguided commander who lacked the competence to control them. The outcome was the torture, rape, and eventual killing of more than 500 civilians, mostly the elderly, women, and children slaughtered in cruel and inhuman ways. For the American public of that era, it was almost impossible to accept that such a thing had truly happened. Just 20 years earlier, the U.S. military had been regarded as a righteous force, defenders of justice and freedom. War crimes were thought to belong to distant, darker places, committed by fanatical Nazis or brutal soldiers in the Far East. My Lai stained that idealized image of the American soldier. Yet the political climate, the free press, and the pluralistic nature of American society meant that the massacre could still be brought to light. And so, it did not take long for Americans to acknowledge and name what had occurred at My Lai, a horrific war crime. The U.S. military itself prosecuted Calley and sentenced him to prison for his role in the killings. Still, the full truth of My Lai left the Nixon administration deeply unsettled. Public disclosures about the massacre were intentionally minimized, limited to Calley's name, rank, and a vague murder charge described only as killing more than one civilian. The American public had long been accustomed to seeing its soldiers as liberators, not criminals. And so, it is understandable why Nixon sought to protect the nation's identity, to preserve the image of the U.S. military and the ideals it claimed to represent. But this instinct for self-protection also prevented genuine accountability or remorse. The United States had once been one of the most important architects of international criminal justice. The Nuremberg Tribunal, the International Military Tribunal for the Far East, and later, the tribunals for the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda. The US had been a generous supporter, a driving force behind these early frameworks for global justice. Yet when American soldiers, officers, and officials themselves risked becoming subjects of such tribunals, the country reversed course to preserve its sovereignty. In 2000, President Bill Clinton signed the American Service Members Protection Act, restricting financial support for the International Criminal Court and prohibiting the extradition of U.S. citizens to any third country that might transfer them to the court. To this day, the My Lai Massacre has never been brought before a true international tribunal, one capable of delivering justice that fully matches the magnitude of the crime. And that day, if it ever comes, remains distant, perhaps too distant to ever become reality. And the United States is not alone. Russia, China, India, Israel, nations with some of the world's largest arms exports and military operations, continue to refuse membership in the International Criminal Court. What these nations must recognize is that international humanitarian law is not a political weapon. It is the last barrier protecting humanity from returning to the barbarity that defined the First and Second World Wars. If crimes like these are not punished with clarity and conviction, we will remain trapped in a cycle of denial, justification, and repetition, the same patterns of evasion and atrocity that history has shown us time and time again.